And so it is Friday. Ready? Okay. End of the month. So this was August 2011. And ETF monthly performance, exchange traded funds. Gold did best on the month of August, up between 10 and 15%. Long treasuries up a lot. Aggregate bonds were up a little. Tips, those are the inflation ones. Bonds were up. Emerging market bonds were up a little. Corporate bonds up a little. And then everything else was negative. Commodities were slightly negative. Emerging market currencies were negative. High yield bonds were negative. World equities negative. S&P negative. REITs are real estate investment trusts negative, emerging market equities negative, and the financials were negative. Bank stocks were in fact 10% negative in August, and it's not surprising. So, not very important, all that. This is much more important. Real per capita GDP percent of previous peak. I put this in because we remember it from yesterday. But this is trying to get back up there. And this is, if you look at all the getting back up theirs, they've all been smooth. Every single one's really, well, most all of them are smooth. There's a bit of a kink in the 1991. But this is that worrying little stop at the end, and that's what's bothering everyone. That not much effort has been made to get back to previous peaks of GDP. When worked out by Doug Short, like Doug Short's working this out. But that's a nasty little twisty turn there, and it's just not making the correct effort to get back up to where it should be. And that's what's bothering most everyone. UK loans versus Fri2Sept bank index. So these are loans in red, actually on dwellings, and in grey behind on this Twitter chart is the bank stocks index and how well the banks are selling on the stock exchange. And basically you can see they track each other, and the more that the banks make or made loans for dwellings, the better their stock price was. And they're not doing it anymore, so their stock price isn't good anymore. Sticking with homes, but going over to the United States. But I would think that chart from the UK would be transferable to the United States as well. US home ownership by age group. Now we'll go down the 1980 column. These are the censuses. The 1980 census, and we'll do the 2010 census. We'll leave the middle ones out. This is US home ownership. 15 to 24-year-olds actually owning their own home. 22% in 1980, which is quite remarkably high, and I think 16% is still quite high for 2010, but a definite drop down in very young people owning their own homes. 25 to 34, a much more important age group, young couples buying their first house. 52% in 1980, down to 42%, a big 10% drop. That's important, I think. 35 to 44, 71 down to 62, again nearly a 10% drop. 45 to 54, it's still a drop, 77 to 71. 55 to 64 has stayed the same, and 65 years and over, it's gone from 70% to 77.5%. So if we look at the total down below, overall, home ownership has gone from 64% to 65%. We could say it's roughly stayed the same. And who's got the houses? It's the oldies that have got the houses, not the youngies. The oldies have either got second houses or they've bought rental houses to make their retirements more comfortable. And it's that's driven up the price of houses, so the young people can't afford them, or something like that. Right, let's get to the meaty bit of this Friday world economic news. Bank of International Settlements The real effects of debt, and these people who have written this, what Ambrose Evans Pritchard described in his article as the definitive guide to debt, or something like that. They've obviously tried. They've seen that debt's a problem, and so they've tried to put some stuff together. And from the abstract we get, at moderate levels, debt improves welfare and can enhance growth. We can all go along with that, probably, but high levels can be damaging. So, when does the level of debt go from good to bad? We address this question using a new data set that includes the level of government, non-financial corporate and household debt in 18 OECD countries from 1980 to 2010. Our results support the view that, beyond a certain level, debt is bad for growth. Beyond a certain level, that being over a certain level, debt is bad for growth. For government debt, the threshold is in the range of 80 to 100% of GDP. The immediate implication is that countries with high debt must act quickly and decisively to address their fiscal problems. The longer-term lesson is that to build the fiscal buffer, that's government buffer, required to address extraordinary events, governments should keep debt well below the estimated thresholds. Up to a point, corporate and household debt can be good for growth. So now we've moved on to corporate and household, saying the same thing. But when corporate debt goes beyond 90% of GDP, our results suggest that it becomes a drag on growth. And for household debt, we can report that a threshold of around 85% of GDP, although the impact is imprecisely estimated. So for those three sectors, we can say between 80 and 100% of GDP in debt, and you're in the poop zone. So let's move on to household debt first for these OECD countries. And it's quite nicely set out here. Household debt, the countries down the left, the levels in 1980, 90, 2000, 2010, and then over on the right, the changes from 80 to 90, 90 to 2000, and 2000 to 2010. All very nicely done. Starting with the United States, of course. 1980, so let's move across, 52, 64, 74, 95, just slowly ramping up, and the percentage increases in those decades. Is it percentage increase? Yep, looks like it is. Increasing 12%, 10%, 21%. Household debt. So it's that last little ramp up, 21%, that done it for the households in the United States. Japan had that. Let's just go. Oh, we'll go all the way across. We've got plenty of time. It's Friday, isn't it? So 60, 82, 87, 82, a slight decrease in the end, giving a number in the poop zone. 22, it started 1980 to 90. That's their boom, and since then households have not been keen on taking on debt, 5 and minus 5. Germany, 59, 61, 73, 64. All very reasonable, and obviously keeping it reasonable by increasing only by 2, 13 and minus 9. Nothing in the last decade. In fact, going backwards. United Kingdom, 37, 73, and then increasing to 75, 106. You daft bastards. So you've done that with a huge increase in the 1980s, reasonableness in the 90s to 90s, and then cranked it on again in the 2000s. France, 27, 46, 47, 69. Not good, but below the poop zone. Italy, 6, 21, 30, 53. Households have never really taken on much debt in Italy. Canada, 56, 63, 67, 94, well up there, and you can see that it's the last decade that Canada's been going a bit daft, paying an awful lot for houses. Australia will do just from the 2010, we won't go across. So Australia, well, far too high, and the last 2 decades they've been paying far too much for their houses. But we'll see later that there is a get out for Australia. Austria is reasonable, so we won't look. Belgium is reasonable, so we won't look. Denmark is an anomaly. And they've done it in the last decade. What they've done before then, I don't know, to get up to 152, but obviously it's alarm bells, clang clang. Finland 67, reasonable. Greece 65, reasonable. Netherlands, clang 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 again, and they've done it over the last 2 decades. Norway's not good. Portugal, well too high, and you can see the 90s and the last 2 decades, but particularly the 90s, naughty 90s for Portugal. Spain 91, far too high, the last decade has been shocking. Sweden too high, the last decade has been not good at all. Right, corporate debt, we'll just go past it quite quickly because we're not too bothered. Quick look down, you can see that everyone is far too high, except the United States, that's below the poop zone at 76. Australia right on the limit, and Greece at 65 is very nice for their corporate debt is very low. That's because nobody in their right mind to lend a Greek corporate anything. Right, we've got another one. We should have government debt. Public sector debt, that's us. Okay, United States, 46, 71, 58, 97, up and down to get to now, which is too high. And obviously it's been very recently that it's all happened. Japan, well, what can you say? They've pushed the boundaries of possibilities. They're just out of this world. The last 2 decades have been incredible. Trying to get themselves out of their lost decades, the government has just piled the debt on. Germany has got themselves to 77, which is just about safe, but will it be safe when they go bailing out other countries? Any debt taken on has been done for the reunification. United Kingdom kept it quite reasonable until basically bailing out the banks and the last fuss that's gone on in the Great Recession. What are we calling this last little fuss that's going on? Oh, I don't know what to call it. Italy, government debt, 129, that's what's killing them, and they took it on early in the 80s and 90s, and they've been very reasonable lately. They've really been trying to keep their shit together, but it was too high too early, and it's just been a struggle for them ever since, and that's what's whacking their growth. They just basically haven't had any growth for 10 years. Canada's government is too high as well, but they're relying on selling oil. Australia, as you can see, is only 41, so their enormous household debts will be backed by their government, will have to be backed by the government when it all explodes and the banks explode. The Australian government can come in behind the banks. Austria just very average, averagely bad, of course, because it's in the poop zone. Belgium is far too high. They took their debt on in the 80s. Denmark, the government is reasonably high, and it's too high to come in behind the over-indebted households. Finland's reasonable. Greece, shockingly high, but we know what's going on there. The Netherlands is again too high to come in behind their very large banks and their very large household borrowings. So the Netherlands better hope that everything turns out well for the next 3 years, or they are going to be in trouble. And if Netherlands is in trouble, bailouts for the rest of Europe is in trouble. And we're coming towards the end. Norway's reasonable, they'll be all right. Portugal far too high. You can see that they've had two lots of increases in the 80s and in the 2000s that have got themselves totally out of control. Spain at 72, that's the government. Again, it's too high to come in to save the banks and the households that are too high. I mean, it's reasonable being under the poop zone, but it's just not enough. They're just not got enough spare capacity to come in and rescue the household sector or the banking sector that's lent so much to the speculators in housing. And Sweden, I think, are going to be all right. So that's about it. That's the Bank of International Settlements definitive guide to growth and Mystic's guide to the Bank of International Settlements guide. So have a good weekend, and basically hope, going back to that opening chart, that real per capita GDP percent of its previous peak gets itself back up to where it was, because it's going to be necessary to pay those debts back. But if we go into a double dipper, all bets are off, and the poop zone gets deeper and smellier and nastier. Hey, life will go on though. Have a good weekend. Speak to you next week. Bye.